Hello everyone, welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy. Good evening all. So in this lecture we are going to discuss about the European Union's new carbon border adjustment mechanism or new carbon border tax mechanism. This new carbon border tax mechanism that was approved by the European Parliament recently. So there were several concerns from the Indian side with respect to this European Union carbon border tax mechanism because it will have a lot of impact on India's exports to European Union. So it would severely restrict India's exports to the European Union. So it is not just about the India's exports to European Union, but also along with the India, there are several other developing and the least developing countries such as Africa and countries which are in the global south. So therefore, India as a leader of the global south strongly opposing the carbon border tax mechanism of the European Union because it is discriminatory in nature, and apart from the discriminatory nature of this carbon border tax mechanism, it has not paid any attention to the concerns of the developing world. So therefore, in this context, in today's lecture, we will understand what is exactly the European Union's new carbon border adjustment mechanism and what are its concerns. So what are the concerns of India with respect to this new tax mechanism of the European Union? So before discussing this carbon border adjustment mechanism, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also hit the like button if you like a video. Okay, so now if we go into the details of this carbon border adjustment mechanism, so I will briefly give you an introduction so about this tax mechanism, right? So now European Union has launched Fit for 55 campaign. Okay, Fit for 55 campaign. So the overall objective of this Fit for 55 campaign is to become carbon neutral or reduce the intensity of the carbon emissions in the European Union. So this is the objective of introducing this carbon border tax mechanism. So however, as part of this tax mechanism, European Union, what European Union will do? So European Union countries already following certain standards with respect to emission. Okay, so they are already following the emission standards in those respective countries, all the European Union countries. So they are already following the emission standards. So all the companies which are in the European Union, they must follow the emission standards so that were imposed by the respective countries as part of the European Union. So therefore, what happened, since these companies have shifted to the less emission intensity technologies, so either their productivity would be lesser, either their production would be lesser, or they will have a higher production cost. Okay, so higher production costs for their respective industry or respective companies. Okay, so you understand this. So since European Union has imposed the emission standards on the companies, so therefore in order to switch over to these technologies, the production cost would be higher, or those companies which have not yet adopted the new technologies, the production would be lower because of these emission standards already imposed by the European Union. Okay, so now in this context, what happens? The European Union products would be costlier for the people over there. Okay, so the companies or industries which are in European Union, so whatever they produce, they charge higher prices. Okay, so they charge higher prices. So however here, so since the industries or the companies which have been charging higher prices in the European Union, so they generally few people depend on imports because imports seem less costly. Imports seem less costly compared to the domestic products because the restrictions, the emission restrictions that were imposed by the European Union. So now when imports are available at a cheaper price at a lesser cost compared to the domestic products, this lack of level playing field between the imports and whatever they produce domestically. Okay, so there's a lack of level playing field between the imports and the domestic companies. So therefore European Union over a period of time will depend more on the imports, so that will not be sustainable for the European Union economy. So in order to deal with this, what they have done, so they have introduced this carbon border adjustment mechanism. So as part of this carbon border adjustment mechanism, what they will do, so there are certain countries, okay, so in those countries, while producing a product, if they don't meet these emission standards, if they don't meet these emission standards that were imposed by European Union, so while they are entering into the European border, these imports from other countries entering into the European Union borders, so the European Union will impose this carbon border adjustment tax on the imports which doesn't meet these environmental or emission standards. And that is where European Union has been trying to establish a level playing field. And apart from establishing a level playing field, European Union is also forcing the developing countries like India to adopt clean technologies and also maintain the emission standards. So however, with lower levels of technology and the developmental needs, it is not possible for the developing countries like India to switch over to transform towards the clean technologies. So this is where the exact conflict has started with respect to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Okay, so now in this infographic, so there are certain producers who are outside the European Union. So they produce higher emissions. For example, cement, steel and iron, aluminum, fertilizer and electricity production. So when I say electricity production, for example, thermal energy. So thermal energy uses the fossil fuels for the production of electricity. Okay, so apart from electricity, cement, steel and iron, aluminum and fertilizer, and all these are major categories of export from India to European Union. So they are the major categories of exports from India to European Union. Now this carbon border tax mechanism of European Union will be applicable on all these items which are mentioned here. Okay, so now several sectors need to buy these certificates to compensate for the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so these sectors have to buy the carbon certificates. Okay, so they have to buy the certificates before exporting these products to the European Union. Okay, so usually how the cycle takes place. For example, someone has been importing steel from India. Okay, someone has been importing steel from India. So if steel does not meet the environment emission standards of the European Union, so at the European Union border, from the customs, at the customs of European Union, so the importer have to buy the certificate from the national competent authorities. Okay, so these national competent authorities will sell the respective certificates for the importer of these products. Okay, so this is essentially to compensate the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so here taxing or charging the respective greenhouse gas emissions by purchasing a certificate, right? So this fund, which is essentially gained through these certificates, will be used for national budgets and European Union budget. Okay, so this national competent authority sells certificate, and the declarant, the importer, will also buy the certificates from the European Union. Okay, so going into this issue, we will understand in a deeper manner. Okay, so generally what happens, for example, this is European Union importer and this is non-European Union producer. Okay, so this is European Union producer company industry. So for example, this company is based in India. Imagine, so this company is based in India and this is also called as non-European Union producer. Okay, so first European Union, before importing this, so it looks at the primary thing, that is, our European Union climate standards are met while producing a particular good by this non-European Union producer. So if it meets the European Union climate standards, then it would be allowed into the European Union markets without any European Union markets, without the carbon border adjustment mechanism or carbon border tax. Okay, so however, if it not meet the European Union climate standards, then it has to pay the carbon border adjustment mechanism to enter into the European market. Okay, so since it pays the carbon border adjustment mechanism before entering the European market, only then it will be considered as it meets the European Union climate standards, because it already paid the carbon border adjustment mechanism tax. Okay, so this is how the procedure usually takes place. So if I can tell you briefly about this carbon border adjustment mechanism, it is in news because recently European Union Parliament had adopted a resolution for the implementation of this carbon border adjustment mechanism. Okay, so they have adopted a resolution for the implementation of this carbon border adjustment mechanism. So apart from that, they also have the Fit for 55 target. Okay, so Fit for 55 target, please remember this. So Fit for 55 is with respect to which of the following organizations? You may get the question. Okay, so Fit for 55 is a new European Union law. Okay, so this law aims to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So this is the objective of Fit for 55. So Fit for 55 is a new European Union legislation. So that mean to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Okay, so as part of the Fit for 55, the European Union has brought the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now we will understand why it is a concern for India. It is a concern because India will about to lose around 1 to 1.7 billion in energy intensive exports, so such as steel, aluminium, fertilizer. Okay, so those are considered as energy intensive industries, and India will lose in trade around 1 to 1.5 billion dollars. And apart from that, this carbon tax would also raise the cost of Indian made goods in the European Union, so thereby there will be less competitiveness for the Indian goods in the European Union. So if we talk about this carbon border adjustment mechanism, so products that are entering the European Union would be charged at the border. Okay, so products which does not meet European Union climate standards would be charged at the European Union border. Okay, so this is carbon border adjustment mechanism. A tax like this would promote a low carbon and resource efficient manufacturing. So no doubt that it will benefit the European Union by helping to meet its objectives under Fit for 55. So however, it severely impact countries like India, where they do not have the adequate resources, adequate technology to adopt or to transform towards low carbon and resource efficient manufacturing. So for the developing countries, it will take some time, because if you look at the developed countries, they are not helping these countries financially and even technologically. So therefore it takes time, and it is also arbitrary as of now implementing this carbon border adjustment mechanism tax. So what should be the way forward for the Indian industry? So Indian industries should transform towards the green methods of production in a gradual manner. After that, so India should also implement science-based emission reduction objectives. So we need to invest more in research and development, and we need to find out technology where that could reduce the emissions. Okay, so now we have discussed this carbon border adjustment mechanism in a very brief manner, and now we try to understand this in a detailed manner. So this carbon border adjustment mechanism is recently seen in news. Okay, so it is recently seen in news because European Union Parliament has passed a resolution to adopt the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So this will impose levy or a tax on the imported carbon intensive goods from the countries. So those include India as well. Okay, where climate rules are lesser strict. For example, if you look at India, while manufacturing of various products such as steel, aluminum, fertilizer, electricity, so the climate restrictions are less strict. So since climate restrictions are less strict, the emissions from these industries are very high. So of course, when European Union import those products with the higher emissions, so that could lead to the problem of lack of level playing field between the existing domestic companies as well as the imported products from other countries. So in order to ensure the level playing field and also reach the goal of Fit for 55 of European Union, they have introduced this carbon border adjustment tax mechanism, right? So what it will do, the carbon border adjustment mechanism will impose a tax on products which are from other countries and which do not meet the climate commitments and entering into the European Union markets. So they will be levied carbon border adjustment mechanism. So firstly, what is carbon border adjustment mechanism? So it aims to create a level playing field. How? So we have discussed how it will create a level playing field for European Union and non-European Union manufacture, and this is particularly aimed to reduce the carbon footprint. Okay, so this is in line with the goal of European Union to become a Fit for 55 or to become a net carbon emission region by the year 2050. So what is India's target here? So India wanted to become net zero by the year 2070. That was announced as part of Panchamrit program. Okay, so this carbon border adjustment mechanism was specifically introduced to address the issue of carbon leakage. Okay, so to address the issue of carbon leakage. Now in this context, what is carbon leakage? So carbon leakage is when companies have been in order to meet the climate policy requirements or to avoid restrictions on carbon emissions in their home country, so what they generally do, they relocate the production or manufacturing of carbon intensive materials to countries with less stringent climate rules. For example, imagine a company. Okay, so this company is located in European Union. Now what happened? European Union strict climate rules were passed. Okay, so there were strict climate rules. So in order to escape these strict climate rules, the European Union company shifted out of European Union. Okay, shifted out of European Union to any developing country. For example, it shifted to the Southeast Asia or South Asia or Africa. So to escape the restrictions imposed by the European Union on this particular company. Okay, so now this carbon border adjustment mechanism, what it will make? So it will now tax the companies which shift out of European Union out of European Union to other developing countries to escape this European Union carbon tax. Okay, so now under this carbon border adjustment mechanism, these products will also be taxed while they are entering into the European Union borders. So this is called as carbon leakage. Okay, so this is called as carbon leakage, and this carbon border adjustment tax mechanism is aimed to curtail the carbon leakage. And after that, so there will be a tax, there will be a levy on carbon intensive products and carbon intensive industries. Okay, so as I have already discussed about those industries, steel, aluminum, fertilizer, electricity production. So therefore this CBAM plans to impose tariff on a set of carbon intensive imports. imports to European Union. So these carbon tax will have to be paid by the European Union importers and companies who export such goods to European Union countries. For example, Indian companies have been exporting goods to European Union. They should also pay a certain sum of money to the customs before entering the European Union borders. So that is called as carbon border adjustment mechanism. Okay, so the industries which pay the carbon border adjustment taxes include steel, cement, fertilizer, aluminum, and electricity. So why these industries? Because these industries release higher emissions, higher CO2 emissions. Okay, so if they release higher CO2 emissions, how can European Union, using these products with a higher CO2 emissions, can become a net zero by the year 2050? And because of this reason, they have imposed the CBAM tax on these products. Okay, so now this CBAM will have a lot of negative impact on the developing countries. So the developing countries which export these products will have to pay higher tax under the CBAM. Okay, so a lot of burden is on the developing countries like India, and India has also taken up this matter officially with the European Union. Okay, so the tax is zero if steel is made using the green hydrogen as a fuel and reducing agent. So now we have been emphasizing on green hydrogen as well. Okay, so there are different hydrogen types such as green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen. So for example, imagine steel, aluminum, or cement is manufactured using green hydrogen. So if it is manufactured through green hydrogen in India, and then if it is exported to the European Union, the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism tax, would be zero, absolutely zero, because here the steel is produced with the green hydrogen. So because of this reason, the tax would be zero. So on the other hand, if it is produced with the natural gas, if it is produced with the fossil fuels, or if it is produced with the electricity which has produced from the thermal power plants, so then of course this carbon border adjustment mechanism would be applicable on all these products. Okay, so this is briefly the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And we have also discussed the carbon leakage as well. So carbon leakage essentially, for example, imagine a steel company. Imagine a steel company which is based in European Union, and now European Union has come up with a strict climate rules. So in order to escape these strict climate rules, so what this steel company will do? So this company will set up its base in other country. So other country in Africa, or in South Asia or Southeast Asia, to escape the strict climate rules that were imposed by the European Union. Now, after manufacturing steel out of these countries, if they export the same to the European Union, they must pay this carbon border adjustment mechanism. Okay, so this is essentially called as carbon leakage. And this CBAM will also address the carbon leakage, the issue of carbon leakage. So we need to understand the impacts of this carbon border adjustment mechanism on India as well. So high burden of this tax on several Indian exports to the European Union. Okay, so Indian exports would be covered under the CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism. So it could be very high, so therefore it will impact India's exports to the European Union. Okay, so Indian firms will also face the problem of losing the market share in the European Union based producers. Okay, so because for example, when India competes with the other nations where they have the carbon efficient technologies, then India would lose out to the competition. Because if you compare India's exports with the American exports may use more technology and less carbon emissions, less carbon emission technology and more efficient technologies than Indian Indian exports would definitely lose out to the American exports. So after that, it will also exports, no doubt it will also impact India's exports to the European Union. Okay, because since India is uh, this will affect the substantial exports, as European Union is an important trade partner for the India. Okay, so it will also be considered as more expensive for India. Why expensive? Because if we export any of these products to European Union, then either we have to pay a higher amount of taxes, so that would severely restrict the exports, to the European Union. And apart from that, so in order to be more competitive, what the Indian companies have to do? So Indian companies have to invest in more renewable energy technologies, more intensive, resource intensive or resource efficient technologies, and lesser emission technologies. So that could be more expensive for the Indian companies in the shorter period of time. Okay, so even though if you imagine a product from India may be cheaper than an American product, uh, but the price will make Indian products more expensive. Okay, so over a period of time, so what happens, the Indian exports would be more expensive in the European Union. So that could incentivize disincentivize importing from India in the European Union. Okay, so this carbon border tax will lead to the sharper trade diversions and more trade among the developed countries, neglecting these developing countries. So as of now, the developed countries have not been providing the climate finance. So they are not providing climate finance. So apart from this, they are also not transferring the technology. So because of these reasons, the developing countries still lag behind. The developing countries still lag behind in terms of adoption and mitigation. So this carbon border tax, what will happen? Now it will increase the trade between developed countries rather than developed and developing countries, because the developed countries have the resources and they have the technology to produce in more less emission intensity. Okay, so they have the necessary technology to produce products with a lesser emission intensity. So therefore it will promote the trade between the developed countries. However, if you look at the developing countries, they do not have adequate resources and technology, so therefore they cannot compete with the developed countries. Okay, so in this context, what should be the way forward with respect to this carbon border tax mechanism? So now many Indian steel firms use electric furnaces. So these electric furnaces are more carbon efficient process. Okay, so carbon efficient process in the sense that they release less CO2 emissions. Okay, so now they have switched over to these electric furnaces and they are more carbon, it is a more carbon efficient process. So therefore India must use its strength to avoid the carbon tax. At any cost, India must use its existing strength at the global level to avoid this carbon tax, because that could benefit the Indian industries, Indian manufacturing industries and Indian exports as well. And this carbon border tax so may force many European steel firms to shut down. Okay, so it will not be feasible for them because it will substantially increase the cost of the production for these European steel firms. Okay, so therefore in this context it will provide an opportunity for Indian steel firms to increase its market share in the European Union markets. However, before that, India have to avoid the carbon tax under the CBT. Okay, so it should use its strength to avoid the carbon tax, and Indian firms should also seize this opportunity to increase their market share in the European Union. Okay, so apart from this, we should also look to switch over or make a transition towards the sustainable methods of producing these items. Okay, so the production should be transformed to sustainable and climate friendly over a period of time. So in future also, this will not impact India's exports to the European Union. Okay, so for this to happen, government have to provide low carbon technologies for the production of carbon intensive products. Okay, so production of not carbon intensive but less carbon intensive products, so that could combat the climate change, and that could also address our existing concerns with respect to the carbon border adjustment mechanism of the European Union. Okay, so ultimately we need to switch over to the sustainable and eco-friendly or climate-friendly methods of production, and government should provide assistance to these industries in making transition towards the low carbon technologies for production of less carbon intensive products. Okay, so apart from that, India should use its strength to avoid carbon tax, and the opportunity that was created because of this CBT in these European Union countries should be seized by the Indian manufacturing companies. Okay, so that's all about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and thank you.